It begins before you ever see the doorway, before your boots cross the threshold, long before your eyes adjust to the dimness and your nose to the stench. It begins with a sound, distant but rhythmic, echoing softly down a muddy village lane, the muffled rumble of laughter, the clank of tankards, and sometimes the high-pitched shriek of a woman cursing a man with the creativity only someone twice her size and half her sobriety could provoke. A medieval tavern announces itself like a theater play before the curtain rises. And you, a peasant, traveler, or perhaps an outlaw, are about to step into something far more than a place to drink. The door creaks, not because it's old, though it surely is, but because it always has. Moisture has swelled the wood, warped the hinges, and no one in this village would consider fixing it unless it physically fell off. That creak is the tavern's first word to you. It is not a welcome, it is a warning. You push it open anyway. The air inside hits you like a sack of potatoes to the face, sour, hot, and alive. Not alive like fresh spring air or the crispness of pine, but alive like the breath of 40 men who haven't washed in 3 days. Ale, sweat, smoke, damp wool, old fish stew, unwashed feet, and faint traces of lavender from the serving maid's leftover bathwater 3 nights ago. They blend together into something your brain does not categorize as pleasant or unpleasant. It simply accepts it. You are here now. The tavern is small. Most were. No grand halls of stone and roaring fireplaces. Not yet. This one is wood, warped planks, patched roof, hay-strewn floors to soak the spills, and low rafters that demand taller men duck or bleed. Candles flicker in sconces made from bent metal. A hearth glows at the far end, more smoke than fire. The light does little to illuminate, but just enough to suggest shapes: hunched backs, greasy beards, shadowed faces, and hands gripping mugs like lifelines. There is no music yet. That comes later, if someone with a lute shows up, or if enough ale has flowed for someone to sing. Instead, there's murmur, the kind of low, constant noise that makes you feel like everyone's telling secrets, and none of them are about you, yet. The innkeeper watches you from behind the counter. He has the look of a man who has heard every lie and sold every drink, sometimes in that order. His apron is stained, his hands thick, his eyes sharp. He does not smile. Smiling is for fools or for men who don't own taverns. You take a step in. The floor creaks. No one turns. This is not a place of sudden silences. Strangers walk in all the time: merchants, tinkers, lost knights, monks with secrets, or young runaways dressed like boys. You are just another story in the making, and no one cares until you give them reason to. A table near the fire opens up. 2 men just stumbled out to vomit. It's yours now if you want it. You brush hay off the bench and sit. The surface is sticky. You don't ask what with. You never do. A serving girl glides by, carrying 3 mugs, one of which is missing a handle. She doesn't look at you yet, not until you nod or slap a coin on the table. That's how things work here. Your voice is not the loudest. Your face is not the most interesting. But your coin might be useful. And then you hear it, a story, from the next table over. A man in a hood speaks low, but you catch words. Cursed manor, blood in the walls, goat that speaks. It's nonsense. Probably, possibly, definitely. But that's the beauty of a medieval tavern. Truth and lies drink from the same mug here, and they both leave you thirsty for more. Outside, the rain begins. Or was it always raining? No one notices. Inside, the fire flares. A man laughs like he's just remembered he's alive. Another slams his mug down and calls for more. You begin to forget the cold, forget the mud on your boots, forget the threat of wolves or kings or taxes, because for tonight you're not in danger. You're in a tavern, and in the Middle Ages, that's as safe as it ever gets. You lean back slightly, adjusting your seat on the wobbly bench. The wooden legs of the table scrape unevenly against the floor with every small shift, as if protesting your presence. But the tavern doesn't care. The tavern never cared who you were or what you brought in with you. It has no memory and no judgment, only need. People need places like this, not for comfort, but for forgetting. The girl with the 3 mugs finally passes your way again. She doesn't speak, just lifts an eyebrow. A question, wrapped in silence. You place a coin on the table, not silver, but something shiny enough. She scoops it up with one hand and returns moments later with a clay cup filled with something warm, brown, and steaming. It's not wine, it's not water, it's not entirely ale. It's something in between, fermented in a wooden barrel that was probably once used to pickle fish. You raise the cup and take a sip. The taste is sharp, tangy, and faintly sweet, until the aftertaste hits like a cartload of sour apples tumbling through your nose. You cough, and the man across the table from you grins through a beard like tangled rope. He nods once, as if you've passed some kind of test. The drink is awful, but it's warm, and that's enough. The walls of the tavern lean slightly, as though the building itself has grown tired of holding up so much history. Every beam is etched with marks, some knife-carved initials, some crude drawings of women, others just deep gouges from years of elbows and fights. You wonder how many fists have slammed into this table, how many secrets were spilled between sips, how many last nights happened in this very spot before a man vanished into the woods or into the noose. At the far corner, 2 old men argue. You can't hear the details, only the cadence. A slow rise, a quick bark, a long exhale. No one interferes. They've probably been having this same fight for 10 years, maybe about land, or a woman, or whose cousin stole whose goat in 1272. In a tavern, history lives on through arguments that never quite end. The fire crackles suddenly, sending sparks upward. You look over and realize there's a dog sleeping beside the hearth. Or at least, you think it's a dog. It hasn't moved since you arrived. No one pays it any mind. Some say tavern dogs live longer than kings, fed scraps, kicked only occasionally, and always privy to more secrets than a bishop's confessor. Above the bar, hanging crookedly on the wall, is a bundle of herbs, sage, rosemary, maybe mugwort. Not for cooking, for scent, to keep the worst of the smells at bay. But they lost that war years ago. Their presence is ceremonial now, like the dusty cross over the doorframe, just enough to keep the place from sinking entirely into sin. A stranger enters. Everyone notices. Heads don't turn, but shoulders shift. Eyes glance. The door creaks again, then slams shut. He's tall, wearing a dark cloak damp from the rain, with boots that were not made in this village. Foreign mud clings to them. He walks with confidence, but not arrogance. A man used to being watched, and used to watching others. He says nothing. The innkeeper gives him a slow look, a glance like a page turning, absorbing, recording, reserving judgment. The stranger orders something with a nod, drops 2 coins, silver ones, and leans against the counter. He scans the room, eyes pausing briefly on you, then moving on. You don't know his story, but in this moment, you don't need to. The tavern will reveal it in time, in a song, in a slip of the tongue, in a fight. Or perhaps he'll vanish before dawn, leaving only rumor in his place. The candles flicker low now. Wax pools around their bases, and the smell of melting tallow blends with smoke and sweat. The heat from the hearth turns the air thick and slow. You sip your drink again. It's no better, but it's yours now. A bard appears near the entrance, young, underfed, and smiling like someone who's convinced himself he'll be paid tonight. He carries a lute, missing a string, and begins to pluck a tune, something old and wordless, a melody born from famine and frost, tuned in minor chords. The room doesn't go silent, but the pitch of conversation dips, making space for the notes. A woman at the next table hums along, eyes half closed, remembering a verse from her youth, or perhaps inventing one. The man beside her reaches for her hand, misses, and falls into the straw. The innkeeper snorts. A baby cries upstairs, or a drunk. Hard to tell the difference at this hour. A cat jumps onto a beam overhead, chasing nothing. The bard's song continues. The flames gutter and dance in time with the chords. And you? You stay seated. Not because the drink is good or the bench is comfortable, or because you're waiting for someone, but because something in this place, in the groan of the wood, the lull of the music, the hum of lives barely held together, tells you that for tonight, here, you are exactly where you're supposed to be. You didn't come to the tavern to sleep, but you might never want to leave. Not every person in a medieval tavern was there to drink, but most of them were. Some came for food, others for shelter, a few for gossip, fewer still for escape. And yet all of them, in some way or another, had come to be part of the same nightly ritual, the gathering around heavy tables beneath low ceilings, warmed by fire and fermented grain. The tavern was not merely a place, it was a stage, and at every table sat a character with a story, even if that story was only half true or half remembered. The first man you notice tonight is a soldier, or at least someone pretending to be one. His tunic is faded red, stained in too many shades to count, with the shape of an old crest barely visible beneath grime. He wears no helmet, but his hands bear calluses that could scrape bark from a tree. He doesn't speak much, just drinks, slowly, methodically. His sword, dulled and chipped, leans against the wall beside him. You know without asking that he hasn't fought in months, not in a war anyway. He might tell you about some battle in a land you've never heard of, might even believe it himself. But the real fight was probably closer, dirtier, more personal. Beside him is a man who never touches his cup, only plays with it, spins it on the table with thin fingers, watching the light catch on the rim. He smiles too easily, laughs before jokes are finished, and speaks with the kind of accent that makes locals suspicious. A traveler, or maybe a thief, or maybe both. He says he once rode in the carriage of a bishop, says he saw the sea once, and it looked like spilled wine stretching to the edge of the world. But no one verifies his tales, and no one calls him a liar, because in a tavern, truth is worth far less than charm. At the far end of the room, there's a group of merchants. You can tell by their clothes, dyed, layered, patched with the kind of care peasants don't afford. Their boots are clean, too clean, which means they arrived recently. They speak in hushed tones, arguing over grain prices and river tolls. One of them counts coins beneath the table with practiced hands. Another keeps glancing toward the fire, not to enjoy the heat, but to watch the soldier. He fears men who have nothing to lose. He should. Near the hearth is a pair of old women, locals. The kind who were here before the tavern even had walls. They drink something hot and murky from cracked mugs and whisper in a dialect thick with age and missing teeth. Every so often they both laugh. The sharp, knowing laugh of women who've buried husbands and kept secrets longer than the kingdom's laws have existed. You wouldn't ask them anything, but they know everything, especially about you. And then there are the youths, the loud ones, the hopeful ones. They crowd a table too small for their limbs and too unstable for their energy. Apprentices and farmers' sons still shaking off the day's work, dreaming of adventure and full of words they haven't yet regretted. They slap backs, spill drinks, and wager on games carved into the tabletop. One of them swears he'll be a knight someday. Another insists he's already been with 3 women, though the others laugh and call him names you pretend not to understand. In the back corner, half in shadow, sits a priest, or something like one. He wears the robes, though stained and missing a button, and fingers a wooden rosary between gulps of dark wine. His beard is neatly trimmed, but his eyes are glassy. He mutters to himself now and then. Not prayers, not quite. Fragments of scripture, twisted into riddles. He doesn't look at anyone, but his ears never stop listening. Some say men like him drink to forget. Others say they drink to remember what God has seen. There are a few women scattered about the room, not serving maids, but drinkers. Travelers, widows, maybe healers. One wears a ring on each finger and tells fortunes for copper. Another carries a knife sharper than the barkeep's. None of them are spoken to without care. One smile in the wrong direction can earn you a scar. But show respect, and you might learn how to read dreams, or find out which herb cures the fever that swept half the village. Then finally, there's the one who doesn't belong. There's always one. A face too clean, hands too smooth, eyes that linger too long on things they don't understand. Tonight it's a boy, no more than 16, wearing boots too new for these roads and a tunic dyed in city colors. He sits alone, pretending to be confident, but every time the door opens, he flinches. You don't ask what he's running from. If you stay long enough, you'll hear it whispered from another table. And so the tavern fills, not just with bodies, but with stories, with tension, with familiarity. Every person here is known by someone else, or will be by morning. Secrets unravel with ale, truths slip from tongues soaked in courage, and across the flickering firelight, eyes meet, promises are broken, and sometimes, if the night is just long enough, friendships are born that will never survive the sunrise. No one came to be seen, but everyone came to be known. As the hours stretch, the tavern breathes. It doesn't get quieter. It never does. But it settles into itself, like a horse after a long ride, like a fire after the first burst of flame. The people inside shift as well. Voices slow, postures slump. But there's something else that begins to emerge in this second act of the night. Something stranger, softer, more revealing. It starts with the stories. They come uninvited, like fog slipping through the cracks in the wall. One man tells of the ghost he saw outside the abbey, pale and weeping, clutching a candle with no flame. Another swears he saw a fish walk upright across a frozen pond, humming a hymn none of the monks could recognize. You'd laugh if it weren't for the way their voices change. Drop an octave, turn inward, as if they're telling truths dressed as lies, or lies they desperately hope are true. At your own table, a new companion has joined, a miller, you think, based on the flour caked under his fingernails and the sweet, musty smell of grain in his coat. He leans in, close enough that you can see the scar running down the side of his nose like a crooked river. He talks about wolves, not the kind in the forest, but the ones that wear shoes and collect taxes, the ones with parchment and seals, the ones you can't kill with a knife, no matter how sharp. Across the room, a woman begins to sing. It's not a performance, not at first. Just a hum, drawn slowly into words. The song is old, older than anyone here, and the language slips into something that's barely intelligible. Not Latin, not French, just memory. Everyone quiets, but no one asks her to stop. She sings about a lover turned into a tree, about a night swallowed by the sea, about a child who never aged and whispered riddles to the wind. No one knows all the words, but everyone knows the feeling. You look around, and the faces have changed. Not literally, but in light, in posture, in intent. The soldier has removed his sword from the wall and cradles it like a sleeping child. The merchant has begun to slur, nodding with every sentence as if trying to convince himself. The priest is scribbling something on a scrap of cloth, eyes wide, lips moving. And then, almost unnoticed, someone stands. He's tall, not young, not old, not familiar. No one remembers him arriving. He hasn't spoken once all night. But now he clears his throat, and the room, by instinct, quiets. He tells a story about a road that vanishes behind you the moment you walk it, about a castle built from the bones of liars, about a bird that sings only when someone dies. His voice is calm, measured, like a man reading from a book no one else can see. When he sits back down, no one speaks for a long while. And this, too, is the tavern. It's not just the place where people eat, drink, and occasionally fight. It's a place of transformation, where the poor become kings for an hour, and the kings become beggars in their own tales, where laughter masks grief, and songs carry confessions, where silence is not absence, but respect. The fire dims. Some have left, stumbled home, or found a straw pile upstairs. Others simply drifted into sleep where they sat, heads on arms, snoring into spilled ale. A dog scratches at the door, then curls up beside a man who's forgotten he owns it. Someone snores. Someone cries softly. The song from earlier lingers in the air like wood smoke. Thin, weightless, but unforgettable. You remain, because leaving a medieval tavern is never a sharp decision. It's a slow one, like waking from a dream that hasn't yet ended. You wait until your cup is empty, until your eyes have adjusted to the gloom, not just around you, but inside you, until the story of the night has finished telling itself, and you, somehow, have become a part of it. And when you finally rise, legs stiff, joints creaking, the tavern doesn't notice. It doesn't mourn your departure. It simply prepares for the next face, the next coin, the next song, because the tavern was here before you, and it will be here long after. You might think, stepping into a medieval tavern, that the most dangerous thing inside would be the people, the scowling man with the blade at his hip, or the woman with the eyes that never blink. But you'd be wrong. The most dangerous thing was in your cup. Drinking in the Middle Ages wasn't a pastime. It was a necessity. The water, the clear, shimmering liquid we modern folk take for granted, could kill you faster than a bandit's arrow. Ponds were stagnant. Rivers were full of rot, runoff, and waste. Wells, if not properly maintained or blessed by a priest, could breed disease like a mother hen hatching eggs. So people drank beer, or ale, or wine, or mead, or cider. Anything, really, that had been boiled, fermented, or blessed with just enough alcohol to keep the filth at bay. But make no mistake, cleanliness wasn't the same as goodness. The first sip of medieval ale could curl your toes and confuse your ancestors. It was thick, cloudy, sometimes the color of pond water, other times closer to bread crust soaked in rain. It often had bits floating in it, remnants of barley, yeast clumps, or the occasional insect that found its way in during the brewing process. There were no bubbles, no foam, no delicate floral notes or hints of citrus. If it didn't kill you, it was considered drinkable. Still, ale was the lifeblood of the tavern. Brewed in barrels behind the building or in someone's backyard, it was made quickly and consumed faster. The recipes varied by region, by season, and by desperation. Some batches were sweet and thick. Others were sour and sharp, like someone had mixed vinegar with old porridge. Occasionally, herbs were added to flavor the brew, rosemary, yarrow, or mugwort, not for taste, but for supposed healing powers, or simply to hide the flavor of decay. Children drank ale. The elderly drank ale. Monks drank ale so often, and in such quantities, that their monasteries became renowned not for prayer, but for brewing. The strength of the drink depended on who you were. The first run, strong ale, was for guests, lords, or the dangerously depressed. The second run, weaker and cheaper, was small beer, the drink of choice for peasants, laborers, and children who just started teething. But the tavern offered more than just ale. Wine, if it could be found, was a different beast entirely. Imported from warmer lands, Gascony, Burgundy, sometimes Italy. It was expensive, reserved for the wealthy, the clergy, or someone looking to impress. And even then, it wasn't good. It arrived in barrels that had sat too long in the sun. It soured during transport. It needed to be spiced, diluted, or boiled. People added honey, cloves, cinnamon, and sometimes even pepper, anything to mask the bitterness of age and poor storage. Still, to drink wine was to declare something about yourself. I have money. I have taste. I have a death wish. Then there was mead, the golden child of ancient drinking. Made from fermented honey, it was rare and sweet and sung about in poems. Mead was the drink of warriors and kings, of weddings and funerals, of rituals and revels. But in the tavern, it was uncommon, too costly, too sacred. Occasionally, someone might bring a flask of it, gifted or stolen, and share it in whispers, passing it hand to hand like a relic, sipping it with reverence. And let's not forget the spirits, early forms of distilled liquor, not yet refined, often dangerous. They were called by many names: aquaviti, burning water, fire wine. They burned the throat, numbed the tongue, and in some cases blinded the drinker. They were medicine, punishment, and miracle in a bottle. If someone offered you a shot of burning water, it was either a sign of deep respect or an invitation to your own funeral. The drinks weren't just drinks. They were stories. Each cup told you something about its bearer. The muddy ale with twigs still floating in it, That's the farmer who brewed it with well water and pride, the thin red wine with a bitter finish, the merchant just back from the coast, trying too hard, the thick black liquid that no one can quite name, the herbalist's concoction, equal parts tonic and torment. And when someone drank, how they drank told even more. The slow sipper with careful eyes was listening for gossip. The loud gulper was trying to forget. The one who toasted after every sentence wanted you to trust him. The one who drank alone wanted to disappear. And the one who didn't drink at all, that was the most dangerous of all. At some point in the evening, someone always goes too far. It might be the moment a man tips his mug too far back and finds only froth and disappointment. Or when a woman lifts a cup to her lips and discovers the dregs are thicker than the drink. Or when a stranger accepts a second round of something he cannot name, served by someone who won't look him in the eyes. And that's when the real stories begin, because medieval tavern drink wasn't just about flavor, it was about effect. The first few sips might calm the nerves, dull the aches of a long day, loosen a tongue. But after that, the drink became something else, a trickster, a shapeshifter, a mirror turned backwards. People said things they shouldn't, did things they wouldn't, remembered things they swore they had buried. The drink reached down into the soul and scooped something out. Laughter, rage, sorrow, madness. Sometimes all at once. You'd see it in the eyes first, a glassiness like a pond freezing over. Then in the posture, a slump, a sway, a sudden confidence born of ignorance. The speech would follow, louder, sloppier, more poetic, or more cruel. Words became weapons or gifts, thrown without aim, and if the night was long enough, or the cup deep enough, something might break. A heart, a nose, a memory. That's why tavern keepers learned to pour slow, not out of mercy, out of strategy. A drunk who sleeps in the corner is just another body. But a drunk who starts a fire, that's bad for business. And yet, despite the risk, or perhaps because of it, the drink kept flowing. Because in a world where death walked beside you and hunger sat in your belly, the cup offered something precious, control. You chose to drink. You chose to forget. You chose to feel something other than cold or fear or pain, even if only for a few hours. The drink also served other purposes. It was currency, bartered for favors, debts, secrets. It was medicine, mixed with herbs to soothe a cough or dull the pain of a pulled tooth. It was communion, shared among friends, enemies, lovers. The passing of a mug could mean forgiveness or betrayal. A full cup placed quietly at an empty chair might mean remembrance, or mourning, or guilt. Not all drinks were equal, of course. Some were better left untouched. There were tales of cursed brews, made in cauldrons left out under the wrong moon, of barrels that foamed for no reason, of ale that turned black when poured, of drinks that made a man speak in tongues or see the future, or forget his own name. No one could prove these stories, but no one wanted to be the one who did. And then there were the drinks made not to be served, but to be tested. Some taverns in darker corners of the world had a tradition, a game, a dare, a final drink with no name, served only to those who asked. It was said to contain everything: grain, berry, root, flower, blood, ash. It was thick as syrup, bitter as bile, hot even when cold. If you could finish it without flinching, you earned a free night's stay. If you couldn't, well, at least your story would be told. But even the everyday drink was dangerous in its own way, not just because of what it did to the body, but what it did to the mind. Some men found truth at the bottom of a cup, others found violence, others found peace, or thought they did, until they woke the next morning with an empty purse and a broken tooth. And when the sun rose, casting pale light across the tavern floor, the drink remained in the air, in the stains, in the silence. You'd see it in the way people moved, slower, quieter, unsure of what they'd said or promised or done. You'd see it in the way the innkeeper scrubbed the tables, muttering under his breath. You'd taste it in the water that tried to clean the mugs but only spread the flavor, because drink in the Middle Ages wasn't just a beverage, it was a ritual, a weapon, a test, a balm, a curse. And whether you were a king or a beggar, once you lifted the cup, you joined the oldest story ever told, the one where someone drinks and something changes. You're hungry. That's how it always begins. Maybe you've been walking for days. Maybe you spent your last coin on a ride from a merchant caravan. Maybe you haven't eaten since the crust of rye bread you stole off a windowsill 3 mornings ago. Whatever the reason, your belly groans, and the warmth of the tavern only makes it worse. The smell of food, or something that used to be food, coils around you, creeping through the smoke and sweat and drink like a teasing hand. But eating in a medieval tavern wasn't like placing an order from a menu. There was no menu. There's no choice. There was food, or there wasn't. And if there was, you didn't ask what it was. You just prayed it didn't move. You sit at your table, stomach aching, and gesture to the innkeeper or the serving maid. Maybe you slap a copper down. Maybe you mutter a few words, not a request, but a ritual. Anything hot, you say? Anything with meat. You don't expect much. No one does. If you're lucky, what comes is a bowl, heavy, wooden, chipped. Inside is a kind of stew, thick, gray-brown, with oily ripples across the top. It smells like garlic and onions, but also like sweat and turnips and thyme. You dig in with a spoon so old it has its own personality. The texture is dense, but not unpleasant. The meat, if it's meat at all, is stringy. Could be goat, could be rabbit, could be rat. You decide not to decide. The broth is thickened with bread, not flour. Old crumbled bread from yesterday or the day before. Spices are scarce. Salt is precious. Pepper, a distant dream. But you might taste parsley or mustard seed or the faint bitterness of something they thought was safe to eat. If it's winter, the food is sourer, pickled, preserved, fermented. If it's summer, it's fresher but riskier. And if you're truly unlucky, your stew comes cold. Some taverns serve pottage, a catch-all term for whatever is boiled in a pot long enough to blend together. Grain, beans, leeks, cabbage, dried peas. Sometimes the pot is never fully emptied, just topped off day after day with whatever is available. They call it perpetual stew. You call it survival. Bread is common, flat, coarse, dark, with barley or rye. It's tough. You tear it more than you slice it. Sometimes it's stale. Sometimes it has weevils. You eat around them, or you don't. Bread comes with everything. It soaks up stew. It scrapes the last bit of fat from the bowl. It fills your mouth when meat is scarce. If you're flush with coin or desperate for indulgence, you might order meat. A roast, they'll say. Roast chicken, roast pork, roast something. It arrives blackened, tough, greasy, cooked over the same fire that warms the room. You chew it slowly, savoring the flavor, not because it's good, but because it's rare. You hope it's not spoiled. You hope it's not hoarse. You hope. Sometimes the tavern offers fish, salted, smoked, boiled. In coastal towns, that might mean cod or herring. Inland, it's eels or carp or whatever they could drag from the river. Fish comes with bones and silence. You eat it carefully, hoping no sliver lodges in your throat. And then there are the pies. God help you if you order a pie. They come sealed in thick crusts, not to eat, but to preserve. The pastry is a lid, not a meal. Inside might be meat or offal, or fruit gone just soft enough to call cooked. Some pies are sweetened with honey or dried currants. Others are bitter, sour, or both. You might bite into a pie and find something delicious. You might bite in and find something still looking at you. That's the gamble. Cheese is safer, usually. Hard cheese lasts longer. Soft cheese smells like ambition gone wrong, but it fills you. Sits in your belly like a stone. Gives you dreams thick with color. Eggs? Rare, expensive, and only available if the chickens haven't been stolen. They're boiled or scrambled or thrown raw into a stew to thicken it. You don't complain. Fruit and vegetables are seasonal. Apples, pears, plums, when available, come dried or stewed. Root vegetables like turnips and parsnips show up often, boiled until unrecognizable. If you see anything green, you eat it fast, because it won't last. Nothing green does. And then there are the mystery meals. The plate arrives and you don't ask questions. You poke it, smell it, taste it, guess. It could be blood pudding, it could be tripe, it could be lung, liver, or kidney. All of it is fair game. Nothing is wasted in a world where waste is a sin and hunger a constant companion. Because in a medieval tavern, food wasn't about taste, it was about staying alive, and even that was never guaranteed. Of course, not all food was meant to be eaten. Some of it was meant to be seen. A few taverns, particularly those in larger towns or trade hubs, made a show of food. Meat roasted on a spit in the open, fat crackling, smoke rising to mingle with the laughter. A goose, trussed and gleaming, might turn slowly above a hearth, its scent perfuming the air and turning every head. Not because many could afford it, they couldn't, but because its presence told a story. That this place had bounty, that this place could host power, even if only for one night. But more often, what was displayed was not for the common folk. It was a lure, a promise, a decoration made of hunger. If you were poor, and most were, you watched. Maybe the scraps would come your way. Maybe you could buy the bones. Maybe you could gnaw at what someone else left behind. That's how food worked. It was a ladder. At the top, the rich ate venison and duck, pastries filled with figs and spiced wine reductions. At the bottom, the rest gnawed on crusts and salted lard, eating in shadow while laughter echoed from the well-lit end of the room. Still, even the poorest peasants held traditions, recipes passed down not on paper, but by mouth. Oats soaked overnight and fried into cakes. Greens boiled with herbs gathered by moonlight. Pancakes made from flour and water and hope. The women who cooked did so with instinct, not instruction. They tasted with fingers, measured with memory, seasoned with whatever they had. And with what they didn't, they made do. But the tavern changed all that. In the tavern, food wasn't just sustenance. It was a shared experience, a negotiation, a gamble. You might sit beside a stranger and split a bowl without knowing their name, or trade a crust of bread for a tale worth far more. Sometimes, one man bought the meal, and another man paid in blood. You never quite knew which was which. And then there were the festivals. Once in a while, usually tied to some saint's day or royal birth or bountiful harvest, the tavern became something else, a place of feasting. Tables groaned under weight they weren't built for. Barrels were rolled in by the dozen. Meat sizzled on spits until fat dripped like wax. Pies were carved open like treasure chests. Bread was torn with fists, not knives. There was laughter and music and fights and proposals. Even the poorest peasant might, for a single night, eat like a king. But feasts had their own danger, because after the meal came the aftermath, the bloated stomachs, the loosened tongues, the staggering men who forgot where home was. Fights broke out, bets were made, and somewhere in the corner, a forgotten dish rotted quietly in its bowl, a reminder that joy in this world was never made to last. The next morning, the tavern would return to its rhythm. The fire would be rekindled, the tables scrubbed or not, the pot refilled, and once again the stew would bubble, the bread would harden, the cheese would sweat. And you? You'd sit there again, spoon in hand, and eat what was offered. Not because it was good, not because it was fresh, but because it was there. And in the Middle Ages, there was often the best you could hope for. At first, it's a murmur, a low, constant hum that threads through the air like wood smoke, the kind of sound you barely notice unless it stops. Voices mingling with clinking cups, boots scraping across straw-covered floors, the distant sigh of wind pushing against cracked shutters. In the early hours of the evening, a medieval tavern sings a quiet song, not of peace, but of settling, of men finding their seats, of women loosening their shawls, of dogs curling into corners and fire settling into coals. But that's just the prelude. As the cups empty and the pots are scraped clean, the night unfolds like a symphony of the unruly and unrestrained. Each tavern has its own rhythm, its own signature tune, and once the ale starts to speak louder than reason, the music of the night rises. It begins with laughter, real laughter, not the polite kind or the quiet chuckles of restraint, but the full-bodied kind that rocks tables and spills drinks. The laughter of men who haven't smiled all week, who found something, anything, that made them forget. A filthy joke, a ridiculous boast, a slurred tale about a donkey and a bishop that no one believes but everyone wants to hear again. Then comes the music. Maybe it's a bard with a cracked lute, his fingers calloused from miles of travel. Maybe it's a serving girl with a voice that could calm storms, or stir them. Maybe it's just a man pounding rhythm into a table with his fists, while others chant around him. Music in a medieval tavern wasn't refined. It wasn't beautiful. It was alive. It bled into everything, weaving through words and fights and flirting. A song might start as a whisper and end as a battle cry. Voices rise, stories grow louder, feet stamp, tables thud under the weight of spilled tankards. Someone howls like a wolf, and someone else joins in. A man bangs on the bar demanding another drink, while another sings an old ballad so out of tune it becomes new again. Laughter tips into shouting, shouting tips into song, and then someone drops a cup. Silence doesn't follow, not yet. Instead, there's a beat, a pause, short but sharp, where everyone looks. The clatter of pottery or pewter hitting the floor is a note that cuts through the noise like a blade. It means someone is drunker than they should be, or angrier, or both. A chair scrapes, A voice mutters, and suddenly the tavern's music changes key. Now it's tension, a thread pulled taut. Two men rise, one staggering, the other still but fuming. A name is said. A debt is remembered. A woman's laugh echoes too close. The crowd goes quiet, not out of fear, but anticipation. This is part of the night, too, as natural as the fire's glow or the sourness in the air. The first punch doesn't land well. It rarely does. Maybe it glances off a shoulder. Maybe it misses entirely. But it's enough. A table overturns. Mugs scatter. Someone dives for their drink while someone else dives into the fray. The two men become three, then five. Then everyone forgets what started it, and the tavern becomes something else. Chairs crack. Fists fly. A candle is knocked over and someone screams about fire. A dog barks, then bites. A woman hurls a tankard that breaks on the wall, or a skull. The innkeeper shouts, swinging a ladle like a club. The bard hides behind a barrel. The priest stands on a bench, reciting scripture with slurred urgency. But even in the chaos, there is rhythm. This is not war. This is not madness. This is release. A ritual more ancient than the drink itself, the tavern brawl. A place to let loose the week's frustrations, to bleed a little, to prove something forgotten or never known. And when it's over, when bodies lie panting on the floor, when blood mingles with ale, when someone cries and someone else laughs, the tavern exhales. Someone writes a chair. Someone lifts a friend. Someone passes a mug to a man whose eye is swelling shut. The fire still burns, and someone, always, starts to sing again. Eventually, everything settles. The fight ends not with a winner, but with exhaustion. No cheers, no applause, just heavy breathing, groans, the quiet scrape of a bench being righted. Bruises will bloom in the morning like unwanted flowers. Someone lost a tooth. Someone else lost a boot. And someone, lying still by the hearth, might have lost a little more than that. But no one speaks of it. Not yet. The tavern doesn't apologize. It doesn't ask questions. It simply absorbs the energy, as if this was just another storm passing through. Which, in truth, it is. The innkeeper grumbles and mutters, but doesn't throw anyone out. Not unless blood was spilled on the ceiling, and even then, only if it drips on his stew pot. He knows this place needs these nights. The noise, the fury, the release. Without it, the tension builds, spills elsewhere, into the fields, the alleys, the homes. A brawl in the tavern is better than a murder in the street. As the hours deepen into night, the tavern's soundscape changes again. Gone is the music. Gone is the laughter. What's left is the sound of survival. Snoring. The rhythmic, overlapping snores of men collapsed at tables, women asleep in chairs, a traveler using a sack of turnips as a pillow. The crackle of dying fire, the creak of beams settling under the weight of too many stories, the rustle of straw on the floor as rats begin their nightly patrol, the whisper of wind outside, seeping through every crack, tugging at shutters like an old friend too long forgotten. There's a kind of beauty in it, if you're the sort to look for that sort of thing. A song half finished, a fight half forgiven, a night half remembered. One man hums softly to himself in the corner, rocking gently, eyes closed. It might be a lullaby. It might be a prayer. Maybe both. A woman cradles a man's head in her lap, not out of love, but because he's passed out and blocking the door. A serving maid sweeps lazily with one hand and eats the last of a pie with the other. And from somewhere in the rafters, A single drop of rain taps onto wood, then another, until the roof begins to whisper along with the wind. Outside, the village is silent. Inside, the tavern dreams. It dreams in snores and sighs, and the low murmur of sleep talkers reliving battles or bargains or broken hearts. It dreams in creaks and pops, in the cooling of metal and the shrinking of wood. It dreams in the slow, soft clink of cups being cleared, of bowls stacked, of ashes swept. And you, still seated, still watching, still awake, you realize something. The sounds of the night weren't noise. They were a language. They told stories older than words, of hunger and heat, of joy and grief, of anger shouted through song and sorrow whispered through bruised lips. They were the voice of the people, not kings, not bishops, but common folk speaking in clinks and stomps and sighs. You rise from your bench, stretch your limbs. The night isn't over, not truly, but the tavern has said its piece, its melody played, its song sung. You step outside into the chill air, and behind you the door closes, the sound of wood on wood, the final note. He sees everything, not because he's trying to, but because he doesn't have a choice. The innkeeper is always watching, always listening, not in the way a priest listens with compassion or the way a thief listens with hunger, but in the way a man must listen when every cup, every coin, every corner of his world depends on what happens under his roof. You might not notice him at first. That's the trick. He's behind the counter, always moving, wiping a mug, stirring a pot, counting coins in a wooden box that never seems to close. He limps, or perhaps he pretends to. His eyes are small, sunken into years of smoke and squinting, and his hair is the color of old bones. His hands are thick, not with fat, but with the weight of work, and not all of it legal. But make no mistake, he owns this space, not just in name or deed, but in essence. The tavern bends to his will. The light falls where he allows it. The music plays when he approves. Even the brawls, chaotic and wild, happen under his watchful eye, measured and timed like a cruel sort of entertainment. He knows when to let it go, when to step in, when to grab the ladle hanging behind the bar and thump a man across the head with the grace of a butcher dispatching a pig. He doesn't smile much, but when he does, it means something. Maybe danger, maybe gratitude. Maybe he's just remembered something about you that you thought was forgotten. He doesn't waste words. When he speaks, it's usually short, dry, and carved from a lifetime of dealing with fools. And fools pass through his door every day. The traveler who thinks he's clever, the lover trying to hide her tears, the soldier who drinks too hard and talks too loud. They all think the innkeeper is beneath them, that he's just another man serving drinks and counting coppers. But in reality, he's the only one in the room who knows every secret, because the tavern is his confessional, not by invitation but by repetition. People talk when they drink. People whisper when they feel safe. And nothing makes you feel safer than a warm room, a full belly, and a cup in hand. So they speak. They speak of affairs, of debts unpaid, of plots against landlords and merchants, of smuggled goods and hidden coin, of babies born in barns and wives buried without a priest. The innkeeper hears it all, remembers most, uses some. He's not a cruel man, but he's not kind either. Kindness gets you killed. What he is efficient. He knows what keeps his tavern alive: heat, drink, and control. He doesn't let it fall into chaos, at least not fully. because even chaos in the right doses is profitable. He knows when to look away, when to intervene, when to slide a mug down the bar with perfect timing, breaking a stare that was about to turn violent, when to slip a man a crust of bread instead of a knife, when to send the bard outside for a smoke just before the tax collector walks in. He knows who owes him, and he knows how much, because not all currency is coin. Sometimes it's loyalty, sometimes it's silence, sometimes it's a favor long dormant, waiting to be called in. And when he leans in close and says your name, not loudly, not with threat, but with familiarity, you realize he knows more about you than you'd like, where you came from, who you were with last week, what's in your satchel, what's under your shirt. He might ask for nothing, or he might ask for everything, because the innkeeper is not just a man. He is the tavern itself, its eyes, its ears, its memory. And when the night stretches long and the fire burns low, and only you remain at the counter, cup half full and heart half broken, it is the innkeeper who pours the last drink. Not because you asked, but because he already knew you would. He has a ledger, of course. Every innkeeper does, but not the kind with ink and parchment. His ledger is written in nods, in glances, in the memory of faces and the weight of exchanged coin. He remembers who paid and who promised, who lied and who ran. He might pretend not to notice when a man skips out on his bill, but the door never closes without him knowing exactly who just walked out and what they left behind. He'll get his due, always. Sometimes it's through coin, sometimes it's through labor, a night's sleep paid for by splitting firewood or sweeping vomit from the floor. Sometimes it's more subtle, information, a whispered name, a warning, a rumor that reaches him before it spreads beyond these walls, because gossip is gold. The innkeeper trades in it the way others trade in silver. A passing mention that the taxman is 2 days away, a nod that a nobleman's bastard is hiding in town, a sigh about the blacksmith's wife and her late-night walks. He doesn't repeat them all, just the ones that matter, just enough to maintain his kingdom. And it is a kingdom. Make no mistake, the law has little hold here, not the kind enforced with scrolls and seals. This place is governed by something older, respect, fear, habit. The innkeeper is judge and jury. He settles debts, breaks up fights, and decides who gets the last crust of bread when supplies run low. He knows who can be trusted with a room upstairs and who's safer passed out by the hearth. When the local reeve comes in, they nod like equals, but it's the innkeeper who chooses the wine. When soldiers come through, he doesn't flinch. He offers a drink, not out of politeness, but to see what they'll do. If they're courteous, he welcomes them. If they're not, well, taverns have ways of making men disappear into hangovers and shame. He also knows how to handle the dangerous ones, the ones who speak little but carry too many weapons, the one whose eyes never stop moving. He gives them space, doesn't ask questions, but always makes sure they have the worst table, the one by the door, in case someone needs to be shoved through it quickly. He has protection, of course, not always visible, but it's there. A boy in the corner who never speaks, a pot boy who lifts barrels like they're feathers, a cook with a scar that suggests he once cooked people. The innkeeper never needs to threaten. The tavern does it for him. And if things go badly, if blood is spilled or voices are raised too far, he's the one who knows where the back door is, Who has the hidden key? Who can vanish into the dark without so much as a creaking floorboard? But all of that is just one side of him, because to the regulars, he's more than a warden. He's the rhythm of the place. He knows when to refill a cup without being asked. He remembers which stool your bad knee prefers. He leaves the stew a little longer when he sees the merchant who likes it thicker. He sends the bard over when the table goes quiet, and slips him an extra coin when the room needs cheering. And once in a rare while, if the tavern is quiet and the fire is low and the shadows are long, he'll sit across from you, pour himself a cup, and tell a story. Maybe it's true, maybe it isn't. Maybe he once rode with a nobleman. Maybe he was a soldier, a spy, a thief, a monk. Maybe he killed a man for gold. Or maybe he just served soup for 40 years and watched everyone else fall apart. You won't know, but you'll listen. Because when the innkeeper speaks, the tavern listens too. And in a place where the walls have ears and the fire remembers every face it's ever lit, his voice carries further than any king's. It always starts with a coin, flicked onto a table, spun between fingers, bit between crooked teeth to check its worth. A coin is the beginning, not of wealth, but of risk, of promise, of trouble. And in the medieval tavern, few things attracted more attention than the sound of one being wagered. By nightfall, after the bellies were full and the cups were drained, a new hunger took hold. The hunger for games, not for children, not for amusement, but for victory, for escape, for the thrill of something uncertain in a world otherwise ruled by the slow, grinding certainty of toil and tax. The games were simple, most of them. Dice, mostly. Hand-carved, bone-white cubes marked by soot and gouges. You could buy a set for pennies, or carve your own with a knife and some stolen pig bone. They rolled across tabletops like fate made physical. 2 dice. 3. More, if the stakes demanded it. Some played for copper, some for kisses, some for secrets, others for everything they had. There was no mercy in the roll. One man might win the night's stew with a lucky throw. Another might lose his boots, or his wedding ring, or the goat he promised was waiting outside. No one checked, no one cared. What mattered wasn't truth, it was confidence. Bluffing was half the game, swearing the dice had betrayed you, claiming the table was tilted, accusing the man across from you of breathing wrong during your throw. Fingers hovered near knives, just in case. Then there were the card games, not with the ornate painted decks of later ages, but crude slips of parchment, marked with charcoal symbols or painted from memory. Every tavern had its own rules, every region its own game. One might involve suits and values, another might be a frantic race to slap the right symbol. The goal was always the same: outwit, outcheat, outlast. And it wasn't just about cards or dice. Some played knucklebones, a game older than the tavern itself, using the bones of animals to predict fortune or decide bets. Others played board games etched into the tables themselves, grids and runes worn smooth by 100 drunken strategies. Still others bet on challenges. Who could drink the most? Who could hold their breath the longest? Who could recite the king's lineage backward without passing out? Some games were physical: arm wrestling, thumb wars, knife-throwing contests where the line between sport and violence blurred quickly. The bravest, or most foolish, would play Sting the Nail, a brutal contest where men took turns pressing their dagger tips into the backs of their own hands, trying to draw blood without flinching. The winner walked away with coin. The loser often walked away with fewer fingers. And then there were the games no one talked about. Dark wagers whispered in corners, behind curtains or down in cellars where the light didn't reach. Bets placed on lives, not luck. Who'd survive the winter? Who'd sleep with whom? Who'd leave town before sunrise? And who wouldn't? Cheating was common, expected even. A second set of dice, a marked card, a silent signal between friends. Some games were never meant to be won fair. The real skill wasn't in playing clean. It was in cheating well enough not to be caught. Because if you were caught, well, that's when the games stopped being games. The tavern's energy could shift in an instant. A laugh could freeze. A hand could fly. A blade could flash. And suddenly, the wager wasn't copper. It was blood. You can almost chart the hour of the night by the tension in the air. Early evening, the games are playful. Coins slide easily. Laughter is still honest. But by the second round of drinks, or the fourth, the mood darkens. People lean in. Words are whispered. Knuckles tighten. A man accuses another of cheating. Another denies it. A third, who has no stake in the game, jumps in just to stir the pot. Then comes the shove. Not a hard one, just enough to push a chair. Just enough to spill a drink. Just enough to demand a response. No one wants it to escalate, but no one can stop it. Because here, in the tavern, pride is worth more than gold. And a man who walks away from an insult might as well leave town. The blade comes next. Not always steel. Sometimes it's a broken mug, jagged at the rim. Sometimes it's a spoon filed sharp on a grindstone. Sometimes it's just a fist, fast and wild. But the message is always the same. You lost the game, but you won't lose your dignity. The brawl erupts. Furniture topples, benches crack. Someone's back hits the wall hard enough to shake the candles loose. The dice scatter, the cards fly. The coins vanish, snatched up in the chaos by clever fingers with no loyalty to anyone. And amid it all, the innkeeper watches. If it's just noise, he stays where he is. If it's blood, he moves. Not quickly. He doesn't need to. One shout from him, and the boy in the corner steps forward, silent and fast. One lift of his ladle, and the whole room remembers who truly controls the stakes here. Still, wounds happen. A slashed hand, a split lip, a man limping out into the street with shame on his face and a knife wound in his thigh. The lucky ones go home with stories. The unlucky ones don't go home at all. And the game continues. Always. Tomorrow, next week. Different players, same table. Because gambling is not just for fools. It's for the desperate, the bored, the hopeful, the drunk, the broken. The ones who lost everything and think, just maybe, they can win it back. And sometimes they do. Sometimes the roll goes right. The card lands perfect. The bet pays off. And for one brief moment a man is rich, not forever, not even for the night, but long enough to buy a second drink, long enough to call out for the music to start again, long enough to believe. And that's the magic of the tavern. It doesn't need to be fair. It just needs to be possible. One more roll, one more card, one more night. You sit back in your chair, coins warm in your palm, blood still drying on your sleeve, and you smile, because for now you're still in the game. There were laws, of course, decrees and proclamations, scribbled by candlelight and sealed with wax, posted crooked on wooden doors for those who could read them, which was few. The king had his rules, the church had more. But out on the road, between the castle and the cathedral, between one muddy village and the next, none of that truly mattered. What mattered was what you could enforce. And in the medieval world, taverns sat at the center of this gray expanse between order and chaos. They weren't lawless, not exactly, but they weren't sanctuaries either. They were crossroads, refuge for travelers, rogues, knights, and nobodies alike, places where men ducked from justice or bought it. If you stepped inside a tavern expecting justice, you were either a fool or a noble, and one of those wouldn't make it to morning. Each tavern had its own code, its own silent agreement understood by the locals and ignored by outsiders at their peril. These rules were not written, they were lived, enforced not by guards but by glances, not by courts but by fists. Rule 1. Don't draw steel unless you intend to use it. The threat of a weapon was meaningless if not followed through. Bluffing got you hurt. Posturing got you killed. In a world where life was cheap and tempers were dear, it was safer to swing than to hesitate. But everyone knew, once a blade was drawn, there was no turning back. Someone would bleed, sometimes both. Rule 2. Don't insult the drink, the food, or the host. Not because they were particularly proud of any of it, they weren't, but because those insults were personal. An insult to the stew was an insult to the hand that stirred it. Mock the beer, and you mock the land that grew the barley, the mother who brewed it, the culture that survived on it. And if you mock the innkeeper, well, you might find yourself drinking from the trough out back, face down and unconscious. Rule 3. No stealing inside the tavern. Steal outside, that was expected. But the tavern was different. It was a shared space, a temporary home, a pause in the brutality of the road. Stealing from another guest was like stabbing your neighbor in church. It wasn't just cruel, it was cursed. And worse, it often brought punishment swift and final. But rules, even unwritten, only worked when people feared something more than they desired. And so fear had to be cultivated. This is where the real law came from. Reputation. A tavern with a reputation for order attracted merchants, travelers, coin. A tavern known for chaos became a den for outlaws, gamblers, and those who didn't mind sleeping with one eye open. Some innkeepers preferred one to the other. Most learned to balance both. The local reeve or bailiff might visit once a week to collect his due, to drink for free, to mutter about taxes. But he didn't enforce law here. He survived it. If something serious happened, a death, a theft too bold, a noble guest robbed or injured, then the authorities came, with swords, with scrolls, with chains. But only then. And by then, it was often too late. The rest of the time, order was maintained by presence, the innkeeper's presence, the regular's presence, the looming awareness that if you pushed too far, you wouldn't be pushed back. You'd be pushed out, or under. Justice in the tavern was immediate, brutal, and sometimes poetic. A thief might wake tied to a post with his own shoelaces. A cheater might find himself stripped, painted, and paraded like a fool. A liar exposed in public would be given the floor, and then given the door. But not all rules were about violence. Some were gentler, rules of kindness, quietly enforced. Share the fire, pass the bread, offer a song if you've eaten for free, help the drunk to his feet, if not home. Speak softly when someone cries. Cover the man in the corner with straw if he has no cloak. These rules weren't demanded. They were expected, and those who followed them earned a kind of currency no coin could buy: safety, reputation, the chance to return. Because that's what every traveler needed most: not protection from the king's justice, but permission to stay. But beyond the tavern walls, the rules shifted again. Out there, in the dark between towns and torches, there were no innkeepers, no firelight, no eyes to watch what men became when left to their own devices. That's where the road truly belonged to no one and everyone. Travelers walked with blades or with prayers, preferably both. There were tolls at bridges and passes, often collected by men who claimed to represent the crown, but looked suspiciously like the same men who'd robbed your neighbor's cart last spring. If you questioned their authority, they questioned your kneecaps. On these roads, taverns became more than rest stops. They became borders between worlds. One step inside, and you were off the road. You could breathe, you could sit, you could eat something warm. For a few short hours, you were not prey. You were a patron. That illusion, of course, was paper thin. If someone followed you into the tavern, an old rival, a jealous husband, a debt collector, the rules became cloudy. Maybe they'd wait until morning. Maybe they'd join you for a drink. Maybe they'd smile and stab you under the table. What mattered wasn't the law, it was the crowd. Did they like you enough to defend you? Would they pretend not to notice? Would they drag your bleeding body to the door or let you finish your meal first? And in this way, the medieval tavern acted as judge, jury, and sometimes executioner. Because here, justice wasn't about what was right. It was about what could be lived with. A man who insulted the serving girl might be tripped on his way out. One who shortchanged the bard might find his horse mysteriously missing in the morning. A traveler who threw coin around too freely might not wake up at all. But the man who helped a limping merchant inside, he'd find an extra cup at his table. The woman who defended the barmaid from a drunk's wandering hands, she'd find herself sung about in the bard's next tune. The rules were fluid, but they flowed in a pattern, a kind of ethics built not on law but on mutual survival. No one here had time for written codes. They lived by the rhythm of glances, of debts repaid in silence, of names remembered or forgotten when forgetting was safer. And so the tavern remained, neither lawful nor lawless, a place where the worst people sometimes did the best things, and the best people sometimes vanished into shadow, a place where a murderer could sleep in peace, so long as he paid his bill and didn't speak too loudly, where a friar might lose all his dignity at cards and gain it back by mending a drunk's broken nose. Outside, the cold wind blew down the empty road, carrying the howl of wolves and the clatter of cartwheels. Inside, a man scraped his chair back from the table and stood. Eyes followed. Words paused. But he only pulled his cloak tighter, dropped a coin on the wood, and nodded toward the hearth. Everyone watched until the door shut behind him, and then the dice rolled again. Because in the medieval world, law came and went like seasons, but the tavern's justice, that stayed the same. The moment she steps through the door, the air changes. It might be subtle, a slight lull in conversation, a single note in the bard's tune held just a breath too long, a slow turning of heads not out of curiosity, but out of calculation. A woman entering a medieval tavern isn't just another guest. She is a disruption, a question, sometimes a threat, because the tavern, by default, was a man's domain, a place of sweat and smoke, of loud voices and spilled ale, of bruised knuckles and the steady rhythm of male anxiety dressed up as camaraderie. It was not designed to make her feel welcome. And yet, women came. Some came by necessity, travelers with no safer place to rest, widows passing through, healers seeking shelter on market days, a mother looking for her runaway son, a sister trailing her brother into the wrong part of town. When these women entered, they did so with their heads high, their shoulders squared, and their eyes sharp, not out of pride, but because showing fear could mean being swallowed whole. Others came because they worked there, serving girls, cooks, the innkeeper's wife or daughter, wiping tables and delivering mugs with practiced efficiency. Their presence was constant, even foundational. They knew who to avoid, who tipped, who touched, who followed them with their eyes but never their feet. They knew the tavern's tides better than the men who claimed to run it. And they could end a brawl with a single shouted name, or start one with a single glance. Then there were the women who didn't come out of necessity or duty, but choice. They were the bold ones, the dangerous ones. Or at least, that's how the others described them. They walked in alone, chose their own seat, and bought their own drink. They carried knives tucked beneath their cloaks and stories wrapped in silence. Some were travelers, some were outlaws, some were lovers scorned, some were none of those things, and simply refused to be anything else. And then, of course, there were the women who weren't given a choice at all. Prostitutes, though no one said the word out loud. They were companions, dancers, ladies of the night. They sat where they were told, smiled when expected, watched the door. They were not respected, but they were necessary, like firewood or clean mugs. Their presence was both scandal and ritual, depending on who you asked. But no matter why a woman walked into the tavern, she changed the rules. Men straightened or slouched deeper. They bragged louder or went quiet. Some offered seats. Some stared too long. Some whispered. Others fled, ashamed of something they couldn't name. A woman could command a room without raising her voice, not because of magic, but because she was the rarest thing in a tavern full of men who all believed they'd seen everything, someone they didn't understand. And that made her powerful, or dangerous, or both. It wasn't just her presence that disrupted the tavern. It was her silence, her posture, her refusal to behave as expected. In a world where roles were carved into flesh and reinforced with prayers, a woman alone in a tavern was either suspect or sacred, depending on how many drinks the watcher had consumed. Sometimes she sat and drank quietly, eyes on the hearth, cloak drawn close. Sometimes she listened, absorbing the room like a sponge so that no one even remembered she was there until she stood to leave. And someone suddenly remembered a debt, a secret, a mistake. Other times she talked, slowly, precisely. She spoke names no one had uttered in years. She knew places that weren't on any map. She asked questions no one wanted to answer. And when she smiled, men either fell in love or fled. But even the quietest woman in a tavern still had to play the game. She had to calculate. Was the seat near the wall safer? Would the server protect her if something went wrong? Could the bard be trusted? Or was he the type to trade a song for a story best kept buried? Every laugh, every glance, every step was a negotiation. And there were always men who tested the rules. The drunk, the curious, the cruel. The ones who asked where her husband was. The ones who offered her their seat as if it were a gift. The ones who reached for her wrist just to see what she'd do. Some walked away with nothing more than a bruised ego. Others didn't walk away at all. Sometimes the woman was faster with a blade than anyone expected. Sometimes the tavern turned on the offender before she even had to rise, because some taverns remembered what happened last time, remembered the scream, remembered the silence that followed. But it wasn't always violence. Sometimes it was just weight, the weight of expectation, the weight of being watched, of being interpreted, reduced, judged. It hung on her shoulders like a cloak soaked in rain, and she carried it because there was nowhere else to go. Still, she came, because the tavern offered what few places did: warmth, audience, escape, a moment outside eyes of her husband, her father, her priest, a moment where she could be whoever she said she was, and if she said nothing, then no one would know. And in some rare taverns that was enough. She could sit, she could drink, she could be. The regulars grew used to her. The serving girl learned her favorite seat. The bard stopped offering songs and simply nodded. The innkeeper made sure her cup stayed full and her space stayed hers. And slowly, the room learned a new rhythm. A rhythm where a woman's footsteps weren't a signal, but a sound like any other. Where her presence didn't change the room, it defined it. Where the tavern stopped seeing her as an interruption and started seeing her as part of the story. He comes in after sunset, not because the road was long, though it usually was, not because he was cold or tired or hungry, though he is all of those things. No, the stranger comes in after sunset because the light outside has failed, and the tavern is the only place left in the world that's still warm. No one knows his name, not yet. That's part of the ritual. A traveling stranger always enters nameless, just boots caked in mud, a cloak damp with fog, a pack slung over one shoulder that looks far too light for someone who claims to have come from the north, or south, or nowhere at all. Every eye turns when he steps inside, not all at once, not openly, that would be rude, but glances drift like feathers, from the hearth, from the bar, from the shadowed table in the back, where three men just finished a game of dice and are suddenly very still, because a stranger means a story, and stories in a medieval tavern are currency. He might be a merchant. His hands are rough, but that could be a disguise. He might be a knight fallen from grace. There's a stiffness in his gait, a tension in his shoulders. Or maybe he's just a liar. The best stories often are. He doesn't speak at first. He nods to the innkeeper, drops a coin, real silver that glints like it doesn't belong, and waits for something warm. Not food, not yet. First, drink. Always drink. The mug arrives. He sips it, doesn't flinch. Good sign. And slowly, the tavern adjusts. Conversations resume, though quieter now. The bard tunes his instrument with more care. The innkeeper moves a little closer, polishing a mug that's already clean. A serving girl wipes a table near him, though there's nothing to wipe, because everyone is listening. The stranger knows. Of course he does. He's played this part before. He takes another sip, clears his throat, and then he speaks. Low, steady, measured, like someone who's told this tale before but is willing to pretend he hasn't. He starts simple. The village he came from, the road he took, the storm that nearly swallowed him on the ridge 2 nights past. He lets the fire crackle between details. He lets the pauses do some of the talking. He describes a bridge made of bone, a woman who sang to him from inside a tree, a beast, or was it a man, who walked without leaving footprints. Lies, most of it. Clearly, and yet no one interrupts, because truth in a tavern is a matter of taste, and the stranger has good taste. He doesn't raise his voice. He doesn't need to. The words seem to stretch and settle in the warm air between mugs and murmurs, curling like smoke around the beams overhead. He has the room now, not because he demanded it, but because he earned it. And that's rarer than gold in a place like this. He talks about cities that shine with lamps made of glowing fish, about deserts so silent you can hear your own thoughts aging. He speaks of temples carved into mountains where monks float instead of walk, of marketplaces where merchants trade not in goods but in memories. He pauses often, not because he forgets, but because he knows the weight of a good pause. And every time he takes a breath, someone leans in. Someone forgets to sip their drink. Someone else forgets they're supposed to be angry with the man next to them. The whole tavern holds itself a little closer, like a child under a wool blanket on a thunderous night. A few ask questions. He answers some, not all. One man wants to know what happened to the beast with no shadow. The stranger smiles and simply says, "It's standing behind you now." The man doesn't laugh, not immediately. A woman asks if the glowing fish ever go out. "Only when they're dreaming," he replies without blinking. It doesn't matter if it's true. The story works. And that's what the tavern hungers for. Because stories in this world are more than entertainment. They're maps, tools, warnings. They tell you where not to go, whom not to trust, which forests never let you leave the same. They carry whispers from far-off coasts and frostbitten peaks, folded inside fables like contraband. But most of all, they offer escape. A man who's lost his crop for the third year in a row can forget for 10 minutes that his future is wrapped in mud and hunger. A serving girl can remember what it felt like to dream of leaving town. An old soldier can imagine he's walking roads again, instead of limping between his bed and the fire. And so the stranger keeps talking, until the mug is empty, until the fire burns low, until the silence becomes thicker than the smoke, and the floorboards begin to creak beneath shifting limbs. Eventually, he stops. He doesn't say goodbye. He doesn't promise to return. He just pulls up his hood, nods to the innkeeper, and disappears into the night, through the same door he entered, stepping back into legend. By morning, no one's sure if he was real. His cup is still on the table, his coins still in the till, his words still floating in the rafters. But his name? Gone. Because that's how traveling strangers work. They arrive with stories and leave with silence. And somewhere down the road, in another tavern just like this one, a door will creak open, and the story will begin again. It's late now, the kind of late that feels soft around the edges, when even the fire gives up trying to dance and starts to collapse into coals. The drinks are mostly gone. The plates are cold. The music, if there was any, has faded into the memory of sound. The tavern is quiet in the way a battlefield is quiet after the last arrow has flown. And yet, no one moves to leave, because in the medieval world, night is not your friend. It's cold, yes. Colder than you expected, even in summer. But more than that, it's uncertain. The dark carries things you don't name aloud: wolves, men with knives, spirits that hum beneath trees, and the bone-deep sense that nothing out there wants you alive. So, so you stay, and you're not the only one. The common room begins its slow transformation. The chairs are pushed aside, the tables, heavy and scarred, become barricades against drafts or makeshift beds for the bold. Hay is dragged from the corner. Cloaks are rolled into pillows. Some people stretch out with practiced ease. Others curl tightly, like they're afraid the dark might shrink the room. There are no bedrooms, not for you anyway. Those are upstairs, behind heavy doors and heavier locks, reserved for merchants with coin, knights with lords to write angry letters, or women carrying too many secrets to sleep among strangers. You sleep here, on the floor, among the people who've also decided that survival is better than pride. There's no privacy in the common room. Every snore, every twitch, every quiet groan as someone shifts against the hardness of the ground is shared. Someone always talks in their sleep. Someone always hums. Someone always mutters a name that makes someone else sit up in alarm, but no one says anything, because sleep in a tavern is not sacred. It is earned. It is bartered. It is allowed. The innkeeper, having swept for the third time, leans his broom in the corner and disappears behind a door you've never seen open. The fire is left to burn itself out. The candles are pinched one by one. The room sinks into half-darkness, then deeper still. And now, in the quiet, you begin to hear the sounds of the tavern sleeping. A low moan from the old man with the twisted foot. A soft rhythmic breathing from the child curled up beside the hearth. The dog whines once, then curls its tail tighter around its nose. Someone is crying, not loudly, not for attention, but in that raw, quiet way only possible when surrounded by strangers who are too tired to care. And still, you do not sleep. Not yet. You listen to the boards creaking under the weight of memory, to the wind outside tapping against the shutters, to the ghost of the bard's last tune still lingering like smoke. And somewhere in that silence, you realize something. This is not just rest. This is trust. This is surrender. To sleep in a room of strangers, armed, tired, broken, is to believe, even for a moment, that none of them will slit your throat before dawn. That kind of faith is rare, and sometimes it's wrong. There's always one who doesn't sleep. He sits in the corner, back against the wall, hood pulled low, eyes open, watching, waiting, maybe guarding something, maybe guarding himself. You don't ask. You don't want to know. He might be harmless. He might be the reason someone else doesn't wake up in the morning. Then there's the snorer. There's always one of those too, loud enough to shake the beams. No one complains. They're too exhausted, or too afraid, or too used to it. A man who snores is a man who isn't watching you, and that, at least, is a comfort. And in the deepest part of the night, just before sleep finally comes, there's the dream, not yours, someone else's. A woman gasps in her sleep. A child whimpers. A soldier jerks awake with a shout, then laughs it off and rolls over. The dreams in this room are stitched from war, from famine, from guilt. You don't ask about them in the morning. No one ever does. The straw beneath you is damp, the floor hard. The blanket you brought smells of old wool and damp nights. But you don't care. It's warm enough. It's safe enough. The walls are thick. The door is barred. And for the first time in days, weeks maybe, you don't feel entirely alone. That's what the common room offers. Not comfort, not peace, but company. A dozen strangers breathing the same air, dreaming the same uneasy dreams, huddled together like coals in a dying fire. The tavern has wrapped itself around you, and for tonight at least, you belong to it. Eventually, your eyes close. Sleep comes, uneven, shallow, but real. And when the rooster crows, somewhere distant, muffled by walls and miles of frost, the spell breaks. People begin to stir, stretch, cough, swear. One by one they rise, groaning like floorboards. Someone rekindles the fire. Someone else pisses in the bucket behind the door. Bread is shared. Water passed around. Coins are counted. Packs are tightened. Regrets are swallowed. And by the time the sun finally touches the window panes, you are no longer a guest. You are part of the tavern. And until the next stranger lays their head on the straw, this place remembers you, even if no one else does. Mornings in the medieval tavern arrive like a debt collector, unwelcome, loud, and entirely expected. There is no gentle sunrise here, no bird song, no soft breeze. The first light that creeps into the room is gray, cold, and honest. It reveals everything: the overturned cups, the muddy footprints, the bodies sprawled in strange angles, mouths open, limbs tangled in cloaks and straw. The glamour of the night is gone. What's left is a room full of aching heads and half-remembered sins. Someone groans. Someone else swears. The fire is little more than a pile of ash, giving off no warmth. The dog has disappeared, likely to scavenge outside. A rat scuttles across the floor. The bard, curled under a bench, mutters lyrics in his sleep that make no sense in daylight. And then the smell hits. Ale, sweat, stew, feet, smoke, and something else. Regret, maybe. The kind that clings to the walls like a bad song and settles deep in your clothes. You sit up slowly, joints cracking. Your mouth tastes like someone else's night. Your stomach churns at the memory of whatever you drank, or ate, or said. You're not alone. Hangovers are the great equalizer of the medieval world. Peasant or priest, merchant or mercenary, everyone suffers. Some clutch their heads. Others squint at the light. A few swear never to drink again, though no one believes them. One man retches into a bucket. Another just retches. A woman slaps the man beside her before storming out the door. No one knows if they arrive together or if they'll ever see each other again. The innkeeper appears. Of course he does. Not with sympathy, but with a mop and a look that could sour milk. He says nothing. He doesn't have to. The scrape of his boots on the floor, the slam of a mug on the counter, the way he exhales when he sees a broken chair. It's all part of the ritual. He knows who drank without paying. He knows who owes more than they remember. He knows who vomited on the stairs. And slowly, the business of the morning begins. Coins are counted, or not. Some realize their purses are lighter. Some pretend they're not. A few try to negotiate. I paid last night. Ask the bard. The bard doesn't remember. He's still drooling into his lute. Then come the quiet conversations. Did I say something to her? What did I bet? Whose cloak is this? Did anyone see me cry? No one answers. Not because they don't know, but because the morning after has its own rules. You don't talk about the fight unless there's still blood. You don't bring up the kiss unless the other person does. You don't joke about the song that made everyone cry. Not until next week at least. And then someone kneels, by the hearth, in the corner. Outside under the eaves, a whispered prayer. Not loud, not dramatic. Just a quiet bargain with whatever gods might still be listening after the night they just witnessed. They promise to drink less, to gamble less, to speak less, to be better. They won't. But for now, in the stillness of morning, with the tavern exhaling its sins, it feels good to pretend. Breakfast in a medieval tavern isn't a meal. It's an act of penance. The pot from last night is reheated. Whatever's left inside becomes morning stew. It tastes of salt, smoke, and survival. There's bread, hard as stone and twice as dry, dipped into mugs of water to soften. If you're lucky, there's a bit of cheese that hasn't sweated itself into slime. If you're very lucky, someone remembered to skim the mold. People eat in silence, not from politeness, but from fatigue, from shame, from trying to reconstruct the night backward like a crime scene. One man stares into his bowl like it might whisper answers. Another eats without tasting, eyes bloodshot, knuckles bruised. The serving girl limps slightly today. She says nothing. No one asks. The chair near the door is broken. The floor is sticky with something no one wants to name. The fire crackles again, but only because someone needed heat for their hands. The magic of the tavern is gone, but the story remains, written in stains and empty cups. The debts are tallied. Some are financial. Those are the easiest. A few coins here, a promise scrawled onto a scrap of parchment, a gesture toward a cart full of apples outside. Take 2 sacks, we'll call it square. The innkeeper rarely smiles, but he takes what's offered. He's been doing this too long to argue. Other debts are social. A man avoids eye contact with a woman he kissed, or tried to. 2 men shake hands with too much force, pretending they weren't at each other's throats 5 hours ago. The bard gives a nod to the boy who helped him find his voice again, mid-song. No one speaks of it, but it's there, hanging in the air like old smoke. And then there are the unpayable debts, a story told in confidence that should have stayed secret, a truth spoken too loudly, a laugh that broke someone's heart, a name said that should have stayed buried. Those debts don't go away. They follow you out the door, trail you down the road, sleep beside you at the next inn. You might forget. The tavern won't, because the tavern remembers everything. By mid-morning, most are gone. Packs slung, boots tightened, heads lowered. The room feels bigger now. The mess remains, but the noise is gone. A few linger, the ones with nowhere else to be. A merchant double-checking his purse. A woman pretending not to be waiting for someone. A man asleep beneath a bench, snoring softly into a pile of hay. And the innkeeper? He's already preparing for tonight. He knows the cycle. He's lived it more times than he cares to count. The mugs will be scrubbed, the floor swept, the fire relit, the stew pot refilled, and as the sun begins to sink again, someone new will push open the door. A stranger, a soldier, a farmer with a secret, maybe a woman with mud on her boots and a coin clenched in her fist. And it will all begin again, because the tavern doesn't stop. It doesn't sleep. It forgives, but it never forgets. And no matter how heavy the morning feels, there will always be another night, another story, another regret. By mid-morning, most are gone. Packs slung, heads bowed, debts either settled or forgotten. The tavern feels larger now, emptier, but not lonely. A few linger, a merchant counting coins for the 3rd time, a woman pretending not to wait, a man still snoring softly beneath a bench. The innkeeper moves without a word, sweeping straw, straightening mugs, stacking bowls, not cleaning up the past, just making room for the next one. Because tonight, the door will open again. Someone will return. Someone will run. Someone will sit in your seat, sip from your mug, sleep where your body left a dent in the hay, and the tavern, old, creaking, patient, will welcome them the same way it welcomed you. But for now, the chairs are still, the fire is quiet, the mugs are empty, and the stories are sleeping. So should you.